The night before I was meant to become a bride, I stumbled upon a truth that ripped my future apart. I hadn't gone looking for it. I had only planned to drop off a pair of cufflinks. Yet, in the dimly lit lounge of the Grand Hotel, I overheard the man I thought I knew laughing with his friends, his words slicing through me like broken glass. "She's perfect on paper," Harrison's voice slurred, that familiar laugh of his ringing with arrogance. "Her money will help expand Montgomery Enterprises, and her connections are useful. Besides, she's completely devoted to me." Laughter erupted, and then came the words that hollowed me out. "She's temporary. Just until someone better comes along." I froze outside the door, the velvet box clenched in my hand, my pulse roaring in my ears. 3 years of memories, our late-night talks, his tender kisses, his carefully crafted promises, suddenly rotted into lies. The cancellations, the manipulations, the way he always seemed one step ahead, it all clicked into place. But tears never came. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me, sharper than any heartbreak. I walked away from that lounge not as a broken fiancé, but as a woman with a mission. All night, I sifted through the empire I'd helped him build. As his business partner, I had access to everything: emails, transfers, offshore accounts. Piece by piece, I assembled the puzzle of his deceit until I had enough to not just wound him, but unravel the entire fortress he'd built. By dawn, the evidence was tucked into a cream envelope, waiting like a loaded weapon. The morning of the wedding arrived not with butterflies, but with an eerie calm. My hands moved steadily as I painted on red lipstick, war paint for the battlefield I was about to step into. My bridesmaids fluttered around me in champagne gowns, Claire, his sister, my almost best friend, fixing my veil with tender hands that almost broke my resolve. Almost. "You're going to take his breath away," she whispered. If only she knew how true that would be. Diana, his mother, clasped a pearl necklace around my throat, her eyes brimming with love. "This has been in our family for generations," she said softly. The pearls felt like ice, a reminder of what would soon shatter. I hugged her tightly, whispering words of gratitude, already mourning the bond that would be destroyed. When the coordinator announced it was time, I slipped the envelope into the hidden pocket of my dress. My phone buzzed one last time. Reporter in place, partners seated, police on standby. I deleted the message and straightened my shoulders. The church doors creaked open. Pachelbel's cannon floated through the air. 200 guests rose to their feet as Harrison stood at the altar, handsome and confident, smiling that same calculated smile that had once fooled me. He had no idea his world had less than 5 minutes left to exist. Each step down the aisle was not a march toward love, but toward his ruin. The bouquet trembled in my hands, not from nerves, but from the weight of what I carried inside my dress. Whispers of "beautiful bride" slid across the room like mockery. 3 steps from the altar, I caught Blake's smirk faltering under my gaze. 2 steps, and I saw Diana's tears, Claire's joy. 1 step, and Harrison leaned forward, whispering, "You look stunning." I stepped back. Instead of turning to the priest, I turned to the crowd. Silence rippled through the church as I broke the seal on the envelope. "Before we begin," I said, my voice cutting through the hush, "I'd like to share some readings, not from scripture, but from Harrison's private correspondence." Gasps. Confusion. Harrison's face drained as I pulled out the first page. "My dearest Rebecca," I read, my tone steady. "Once the wedding secures the merger and Sophia's trust fund is accessible, we can proceed with our original plan. She suspects nothing." The room erupted in whispers. Rebecca, seated in the front, shifted uneasily in her designer dress, one likely paid for with stolen company money. Harrison lunged toward me, but I slipped back, scattering the papers like ash. "Or perhaps you'd prefer details about his offshore accounts?" I continued, my voice cold. Or the misappropriated funds at Montgomery Enterprises. Don't worry, I've already provided copies to the SEC. Right on cue, the heavy doors opened again. 2 agents stepped in, their badges glinting. Cameras clicked as planted photographers captured the moment his empire began to collapse. Harrison's mask cracked. He grabbed my arm, his voice a desperate hiss. "We can talk about this." I wrenched free, meeting his eyes with all the fury I'd buried. "Talk? Like how you talked about me last night? Just temporary? Until someone better came along?" The church fell into stunned silence, and as the man I once loved crumbled before me, I realized I hadn't lost everything. I had gained something far greater: freedom, power, and the chance to rewrite my story on my own terms. Uncomfortably, Harrison shifted under the weight of hundreds of eyes. I held his gaze, my voice ringing clear through the silent church. "I trusted you. I loved you. And you saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone, a means to an end." Gasps rippled through the pews. Diana rose from her seat, confusion clouding her face, horror beginning to take root. "Harrison, what is she talking about?" "Mother, I can explain." "Explain the embezzlement?" I cut him off, my tone sharp as glass. "The affair? The merger that would have bankrupted countless families? Please, Harrison, explain to everyone exactly who you are." The agents stepped forward, their presence heavy and undeniable, flanking the altar like shadows of judgment. Rebecca had already slipped out a side door, but I knew she wouldn't get far. Another team waited outside. "You've ruined everything," Harrison spat, the mask finally slipping, fury replacing charm. I reached up and unclasped the Montgomery pearls, holding them in my hand before letting them drop into Diana's lap. "No, Harrison. You did that all by yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows." Chaos broke loose. Claire sobbed uncontrollably. Diana stood frozen, her world collapsing in real time. Guests stumbled between gasps and hurried recordings on their phones, their cameras flashing like lightning strikes. Through it all, I stood steady, watching his empire fracture before my eyes. As the cuffs closed around his wrists, Harrison turned, back toward me, his face ashen. "I did love you, in my way." I stepped close, whispering so only he could hear. "Your way was never good enough. Consider this my wedding gift. The truth." Then I turned away, bouquet still in hand, walking. Alone down the aisle as the crowd erupted into whispers. Behind me, the wreckage of his legacy lay in shambles. Ahead of me, sunlight spilled through the doors, warm and unyielding. Freedom, justice, and the satisfaction of delivering karma, right on time. Reporters swarmed as I emerged, microphones and questions raining down. Their cameras captured my smile, the bride who chose truth over illusion. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I once dreamed of, but it was something better. In the weeks that followed, the headlines blazed: Montgomery heir exposed, jilted bride brings down corporate empire. Messages flooded my phone from strangers calling me brave, from journalists begging for interviews. I sat in my new apartment overlooking Central Park, a place Harrison once sneered at as new money, and savored the irony. On my laptop, the news scrolled: Harrison and Rebecca indicted on fraud and embezzlement. Pandora's box had opened, and the rot inside Montgomery Enterprises spilled into daylight. Claire called me often, her voice torn between anger and grief. "Why didn't you tell me?" she'd ask, over and over. But deep down, we both knew the truth. Her blind loyalty to her brother had always been her weakness. The biggest surprise came from Diana. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, she appeared at my door, carrying the velvet box I'd discarded. She pressed the pearls into my hands. "They belong to you now," she said, her voice raw but resolute. "Diana, I can't." "I deserved what happened," he admitted, his honesty disarming. The truth is, I never deserved you. Not because you weren't enough, but because I wasn't. The words lingered between us, heavy with loss. Through the narrow window, behind him clouds gathered, mirroring the storm churning in my chest. You know what the worst part is? He continued, lifting his eyes to mine. I did love you. In my twisted, selfish way, I loved you, but I loved power more, and love should never have been a game. For once, Harrison didn't try to deny it. He simply nodded. Silence settled between us, broken only by the distant clatter of prison doors. Rebecca's been writing, he confessed suddenly, begging for forgiveness, as if forgiveness could rewrite the past. And what about you? I asked quietly. Are you asking for mine? He shook his head. No. I'm asking you to know that you were right. The woman who walked away from that altar, she was stronger than the man standing at it ever was. The guards signaled our time was ending. Harrison straightened, summoning a ghost of his old composure. I heard about your foundation, he said. The consulting firm. You built something meaningful from the ashes of what I destroyed. We all did, I replied. Your mother, Claire, me. We found strength in the truth you tried to bury. As I rose to leave, his voice followed me. The night before the wedding, when you overheard me, was that the moment you knew? I paused, remembering the girl, clutching those cufflinks outside his door. No. It was just the moment I finally admitted what I'd always known. Walking out of that prison, I felt lighter, not because Harrison had changed or because his admission gave me validation, but because I finally understood. My strength didn't come from exposing him. It didn't even come from walking away from the altar. My strength came from choosing truth over comfort, justice over illusion, integrity over love. Diana was waiting in the parking lot, her presence steady as always. You okay? She asked gently as I slid into the passenger seat. Yes, I said. And this time, I meant it. As we drove away, the prison shrinking in the mirror, I knew Harrison would serve 13 more years. But I was already free. Free from the ghosts of what-ifs. Free from a love that was more performance than reality. The storm had passed, and above us stretched a rainbow arching across the horizon. A reminder that even after devastation, beauty can emerge. A message from Claire buzzed on my phone. The Foundation's newest initiative had secured full funding. Life had a strange way of balancing itself. I had lost a fiancé, but gained a family. Lost a dream, but found a calling. The night before my wedding had felt like an ending, but it was only a beginning, the start of a journey toward something far more precious than the fairy tale I almost settled for. The truth hadn't just set me free, it had set all of us free. Just your strength in exposing the truth, but the courage to remain open, even after everything. His words lingered in the cool night air, each syllable striking deeper than I expected. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what Diana had noticed long before I did. Here was a man who hadn't built his career around ethics because it was lucrative, but because he believed in it. A man who didn't see my past as a scar to be hidden, but as wisdom earned, written into me like scripture. The truth is, he continued, his voice steady yet unguarded, I've fallen in love with you. Not the headline version, not the scandal or the speeches, but the real you. Brilliant, compassionate, unafraid to stand for what's right. I'm not asking for anything more than a chance to show you that love can be honest, simple, true, standing. There in the rain, I felt something I thought had been lost forever. Hope. Not the fragile, naive kind I'd carried in my younger years, but a stronger, steadier flame, forged in heartbreak and tempered by survival. When I finally admitted I was dating again, Claire and Diana were ecstatic. Life has a way of bringing us exactly what we need, Diana said, squeezing my hand. Sometimes it's the courage to expose a lie. Sometimes it's the strength to embrace a truth. The Foundation's annual gala became the perfect stage for our quiet truth to step into the light. Marcus and I moved together under the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Hotel. Yes, the same hotel where Harrison's betrayal had once shattered me. The irony wasn't lost. "You're thinking about that night, aren't you?" Marcus whispered. "Yes," I admitted, "but not with regret. That night taught me to trust my instincts, to demand honesty. It led me here." His smile was warm, knowing. As you once said, the truth doesn't always give you the ending you wanted, but it always leads you to the one you need. As the music carried us across the floor, I caught Diana's gaze. She lifted her glass in a subtle toast, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, but creation, to build something beautiful out of the rubble of what tried to break you. 3 years to the day after my almost wedding to Harrison, I stood before a mirror in a white dress, not the extravagant gown of my past life, but something simpler, quieter, truer, a reflection of the woman I had become. Diana adjusted my veil, her eyes shining with the kind of happiness only earned through storms weathered together. "This time," she whispered, "everything is exactly as it should be." Claire burst into the room with champagne, laughter spilling from her lips. "Marcus is practically floating out there." And you should see the students. Half of Columbia's business school showed up to watch their favorite professors tie the knot. We had chosen the botanical gardens instead of a cathedral. It was where Marcus and I had stolen quiet moments, discussed our curriculum, and dreamed about the kind of future we wanted to build. Our guest list was smaller, but each face carried genuine connection, true relationships forged in trust. Diana held out a velvet box. The Montgomery pearls gleamed in the morning light, once symbols of a dynasty built on deception. "They belong to the Foundation now," I said, closing the box gently. "A reminder of how far we've come." Her tears came freely then. "You truly are the daughter I was meant to have." The ceremony was everything my first one wasn't: intimate, authentic, alive. Marcus's vows spoke not of ownership, but of partnership. When he said my story had inspired him long before we met, I saw in his eyes the same conviction that had first drawn me to him. My vows acknowledged the journey that led me here. Love isn't about perfect moments or grand gestures. It's about choosing truth over comfort, growth over complacency, and finding someone willing to make that choice with you every day. The reception pulsed with energy, students mingling with business leaders united by our shared vision. The Foundation had just launched a scholarship for whistleblowers rebuilding their lives, a new chapter in our story of transformation. Claire raised her glass. "To my sister, not by blood, but by choice, who taught us the greatest love story isn't about finding the right person, but becoming the right person. And to Marcus, who proved that true love doesn't ask you to compromise your values, it elevates them." Later, as Marcus and I swayed to our first dance, he whispered, "Do you ever think about how different life would have been if you hadn't overheard Harrison that night?" I looked around at the family I had chosen, the purpose I had discovered, the man who loved me not despite my past, but because of it. "That night didn't change my destiny," I said softly. "It revealed it." News reached us later that Harrison was up for parole, but the weight it once carried had evaporated, like the echo of a story that no longer belonged to me. His actions had set my transformation in motion, but they no longer defined me. As the evening drew to a close, Diana pressed a package into my hand. Inside was a journal, Harrison's grandmother's diary from her early days as a Montgomery. Her words chronicled a woman who had chosen truth over convenience, even at unbearable cost. "You're not just continuing her legacy, Diana whispered. "You've reinvented it." Looking out at Marcus, laughing with our guests beneath the garden lights, I felt the final piece fall into place. What I once mistook for revenge had evolved into something far more powerful: redemption. The truth that shattered me had become the truth that remade me, piece by piece, moment by moment. And as Marcus caught my eye with that unguarded smile, the smile that had healed me, I realized the greatest ending isn't the one we plan. It's the one we earn by choosing courage and by embracing truth, no matter where it leads. My slightly rounded belly was still our secret, our first child growing quietly within me, because some stories need to end before new ones can begin. After the lecture, Claire slipped into my office and perched on the edge of my desk, just as she used to during our consulting days. "Harrison's up for parole next month," she said softly. "He asked if we'd speak on his behalf." The words didn't sting the way they once might have. Time has a way of dulling even the sharpest betrayals, turning jagged edges into something smoother, more bearable. "Will you?" I asked. She hesitated. "I might. He's different now. The letters he writes, they're not from the brother I knew. They're from the brother I always wished I had." Over the years, Diana had visited him faithfully, watching her son shed the armor of deception piece by piece. She told me how he counseled other inmates, helping them grasp the ripple effects of their crimes, the hidden damage left in families and communities. And somehow, while his transformation was unfolding in a prison cell, mine had unfolded outside. The foundation had grown from one woman's act of survival into a movement for truth in business. The Montgomery pearls, once symbols of corruption, now rested in the foundation's lobby as proof that even the darkest lies could give way to light. That evening, Marcus found me surrounded by student papers and case studies. He didn't need to ask what was on my mind. "You're thinking about Harrison?" I nodded into his embrace. "I'm thinking about how far we've all come. How that night before my wedding wasn't the end. It was the beginning." The next morning, I wrote to the parole board. Not to beg, not to condemn, simply to acknowledge. The man I once loved chose lies over truth. The man before you now has chosen to face that truth. And in the end, that is all any of us can do: choose truth. Again and again, no matter the cost. At the Foundation's annual gala, held the night before Harrison's hearing, I stood before a sea of faces. Students turned ethical leaders, whistleblowers who'd reclaimed their voices, families who had rebuilt from ashes. 5 years ago, I told them, I believed revenge meant destruction. Now I know it means building something better. The greatest revenge isn't watching someone fall, it's helping others rise. Later that night, Marcus and I walked the gardens where we had once exchanged vows, where dreams had been broken and remade, where we would now share the secret of new life growing inside me. His hand tightened around mine. "You know what I love most about our story?" he asked. "That it was never about revenge. It was about truth, breaking through like flowers through concrete." I thought of the girl I'd been, a bride blindsided by betrayal, and the woman I'd become, one who turned truth into strength, loss into purpose, and love into something that didn't need proving because it proved itself every single day. What once felt like an ending had only been the first line of a better story. Exactly 6 years after that night at the Grand Hotel, an invitation arrived that made my hands tremble. Harrison had been granted parole. Diana was hosting a dinner. The purpose stunned me. He wanted to make amends. Marcus squeezed my hand as we parked outside Diana's townhouse. Our daughter Grace slept in her car seat, 8 months old and utterly innocent of the weight this night carried. Claire met us at the door, eyes wide with hope and fear. "He's different," she whispered. "Really different." Harrison stood when we entered. Prison had stripped him of the polished armor he once wore. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by simple clothing, but it was his eyes that startled me most. Clear, steady, free of the calculating gleam I remembered. "Sophia," he began, then caught himself. "Mrs. Chin, thank you for coming." Diana had arranged the table carefully. Marcus and I opposite Harrison with buffers between us. Grace's bassinet rested by my side, and Harrison's gaze drifted to her with quiet wonder. "She's beautiful," he said, voice breaking. "She has your determination in her eyes." The conversation was cautious, like dancers stepping around invisible landmines. Harrison spoke of his years inside, counseling other offenders, creating programs that paired white-collar criminals with the families they had harmed. "Your foundation's curriculum reached us too," he explained. "I taught it in prison, never telling them that the case study was my own story." When dessert was served, he cleared his throat and pulled a folded page from his pocket. His hands shook slightly. "I've written something. If I may." He began to read, voice steady but stripped of all pretense. "Dear Sophia, thank you, not for what you stopped me from doing to you, but for what you forced me to face in myself. On the night before our wedding, you heard the truth of who I was. Tonight I want you to hear the truth of who I am now." At that moment, Grace stirred, her soft cry cutting through the silence, and without thinking, I lifted her from the bassinet, holding her close as Harrison's eyes filled with tears, not of manipulation, but of a man finally stripped bare, standing at the edge of redemption. I lifted her gently, and she settled. Against my shoulder, her tiny eyes wide and unafraid, as if she sensed the unspoken tension in the room. Harrison's voice carried on, softer now, but certain. "The Montgomery name once stood for power at any cost," he said, his gaze fixed on my daughter. "But because of you, because of Claire, because of Mother, it now stands for integrity. The greatest gift you gave me wasn't in stopping me, it was in showing me another way to live." Diana's tears slid freely as he spoke of his plans, not of wealth or boardrooms, but of using his past to keep others from repeating it. He explained how he had already turned down offers that could have thrust him back into the corporate world. His voice grew steadier, more convicted. "I've learned the truth," he said, his eyes locking on Marcus and me. "Real power doesn't come from bending others to your will. It comes from mastering yourself, choosing truth, even when lies would make life easier." When the meal ended, the air in the room carried something fragile, like a truce, unspoken. Harrison hesitated before asking, almost pleading if he could meet Grace. I felt a moment's hesitation, but Marcus's quiet nod, his hand warm at my back, gave me strength. I agreed. Harrison lowered himself in front of her bassinet, not the polished man I once knew, but a humbled figure with a tremor in his voice. His features softened as he whispered, "Hello, little one. Your mother taught me the most important lesson of my life. I hope you'll grow to be as brave, as honest as she is." Grace blinked at him, her innocence a mirror he could never escape. For the first time in years, I believed his words weren't rehearsed. They were lived. Later, under the cool breath of evening, Marcus carried our sleeping daughter to the car while I lingered on Diana's steps. The stars stretched wide above us, impossibly quiet after the storm of emotions inside. Diana joined me, her voice raw but steady. "When you exposed Harrison's truth 6 years ago, I thought our family was finished," she said. "But instead, you gave us all a chance at something real." Her words pressed deep into me. That night before my wedding had torn my world apart, showing me an ugliness I never wanted to see. Yet out of those shattered pieces, we had built something stronger, something honest, a family not bound by lies or appearances, but by choice, by courage, and by truth. We had become a family, not stitched together by duty or pretense, but by choice and by truth. As Marcus drove us through the quiet streets, Grace safe in the back seat, my thoughts circled the lesson this journey had carved into me. Redemption, I realized, is never about empty apologies. It's about living each day differently, proving, with every choice, that the past no longer rules you. Harrison's transformation was more than the closing chapter of a long and bitter story. It was proof that revenge doesn't always mean tearing someone's world apart. Sometimes the deepest revenge lies in watching them rebuild a better one, and in knowing you had a hand in that change. The truth I once thought would shatter me had instead pieced us back together in ways I could never have imagined. 6 years ago, I believed I had lost everything. Tonight, I understood that loss had been the very thing that saved us, because sometimes the best endings aren't the ones we dream of, or even the ones we fight for. They're the endings we earn, the ones forged in fire and truth, and in the courage to grow beyond what tried to break us.